The wind came down off the mountains sharp as a blade, dragging snow in low swirls across the prairie. Willow McCree pulled her coat tighter, though the lining was near threadbare. Her horse, a piebald mare with more scars than spots, moved slow through the drifted hollows, hooves crunching the crusted ice beneath. Dawn was still a thought on the horizon, the sky a pale bruise of blue and gray, and already Willow had put 10 miles behind her since slipping out from the livery under cover of moonlight. She didn't look back, hadn't looked back in a long time. The world was quiet here, the kind of quiet that presses on the ears, makes a person feel either safe or terribly alone. Willow had long since stopped expecting the former. She learned to trust silence more than words. Words could twist. Words could beg and promise and lie, but silence was honest. It told you who a person was when they weren't trying to be anything at all. The town she rode toward wasn't much of one. Just a scatter of buildings hunched between Riverbend and Bluff, the name weathered off the sign that leaned half-rotted near the crossroads. She hadn't meant to come this way, not exactly. She rode without maps now, without destination. But the shape of the land had drawn her here, low hills rising like the backs of sleeping giants, a line of cottonwoods threading silver along the water. Her horse whickered, ears flicking as they passed the first weather-beaten barn. The place smelled of smoke and horses and iron, familiar if not comforting. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe a warm meal. Maybe work enough to earn a cot that didn't creak beneath her weight. Maybe just a place where no one knew her name. The saloon had no sign, just light in the windows and the sound of a piano gone slightly out of tune. She left her horse tied beneath the awning and stepped inside, boots heavy with snowmelt. A few heads turned. None lingered. She moved quiet, eyes scanning like a trapper, and slid onto a bench near the back. She ordered coffee from a barkeep who didn't bother asking her name. That was fine. Names were dangerous things. Names could be traced. He came in after sundown. Willow didn't see him right away, not until the door swung wide on a gust of wind, and he stepped through like he'd always belonged there. He wore his coat open, snow dusting his shoulders, and his hat low enough to cast his face in shadow. But the way he moved, steady, unhurried, like the world had not yet found a way to shake him, made her breath catch strange in her chest. He didn't sit near her, not at first. He didn't speak to anyone, just looked around like he was reading a book only he could see, and then walked to the bar. She tried not to watch him. She was good at not watching. But something about the way he leaned on the counter, loose and long-limbed, made the edges of her memory stir like leaves in a breeze. She took her coffee, black and bitter, and stared into the cup like it might tell her something worth knowing. When he did look her way, it wasn't the look of a man recognizing someone from before. It wasn't the wary glance of a stranger either. It was like he'd just stepped through a door he'd been looking for all his life. And Willow, who had built walls inside herself like fortresses, felt something in her quiet heart shift. But she said nothing. Not yet. She was still running, even if her legs weren't moving. The storm outside thickened, snow falling slow and sure. The kind of snow that filled up tracks and buried past sins under blankets of white. Inside, the fire crackled low. And she stayed, watching him in silence, while the past she'd been fleeing circled just outside the edges of warmth. The second morning, she woke in the loft above the stable, tangled in horse blankets that smelled of sweat and old hay. Light came through the cracks in the boards, thin and white. Her breath fogged in the cold, and her body ached in the places that never stopped aching anymore. She lay still for a while, listening to the shifting sounds below, hoofbeats, the scrape of a shovel, the low murmur of someone talking to the animals like they might answer. She crept to the edge of the loft, careful not to make the boards creak. It was him. He moved easy among the horses, like he'd been raised by them, one hand trailing over a dappled flank, the other steady on a pitchfork. There was a rhythm to his work, quiet and deliberate. He spoke in a low tone, not words she could catch, but a cadence meant to soothe. The horses listened. Even her mare, mean as thistle and twice as stubborn, stood patient under his hand. Willow watched until guilt pricked her skin like sleet. She hated owing, hated kindness she couldn't repay. Still, she didn't go down right away. She watched him finish, set down the fork, and stretch his back with a groan that made her smile before she could stop herself. Later, she found him out behind the stable, splitting wood. His coat was off, sleeves rolled, forearms marked with old scars that told their own stories. She approached slow, hands out where he could see them. You the owner? She asked, voice rough from disuse. He paused, set down the axe. Caretaker, the owner passed last winter. She nodded, unsure what to do with the sudden stillness between them. I slept in your loft. I figured. He didn't smile, not quite, but his eyes softened. You don't snore. Willow almost laughed, but it came out as breath through her nose. She looked past him toward the hills. Didn't mean to trespass. I can move on. No need, you're not hurting anything. He picked up the axe again, but didn't swing. Name's Elas. She didn't answer right away. Names were still sharp things, edged and dangerous. Willow. He nodded like it was a word he'd heard before, a name that fit the shape of her somehow. They passed the rest of the day without many words. She helped with the tack, careful and quick-fingered, and he didn't ask where she learned to braid reins like that. They didn't talk about where she'd come from or where he thought she might be going. That night she slept in the hay again, warm under 2 extra blankets she hadn't asked for. She didn't wonder how he'd known. Each day after stitched itself to the last with quiet acts, a shared task, a pot of stew on the stove, boots drying side by side near the hearth. He never pushed, never pried. And slowly she found herself stopping in the middle of work just to watch him move, to memorize the shape of his silhouette in the lantern light. She told herself it was nothing, a passing comfort, a quiet stretch in the long road behind and ahead. Then came the night the coyote howled close to the barn, sharp and high, and her heart seized like it remembered too much too fast. She jolted upright, fists clenched, breath ragged. Before she could steady herself, Elas was there, lantern in hand, not touching her, just near. You're all right, he said, quiet. It's just one out in the draw, probably hungry. She didn't speak, couldn't. Her pulse thundered like hooves in her ears. He didn't move to leave. Instead, he sat near the ladder between her and the dark, not watching her, just present. And in the hush that followed, Willow realized something dangerous was beginning to root itself deep in her chest. Not trust, not yet. But something like it. And she wasn't sure if that should scare her more than the coyote's cry ever could. Spring came slow that year. The kind of spring that didn't announce itself with flowers or fanfare, but crept in soft under the snowmelt, turning the earth to mud and waking up the creeks. The world smelled of thaw and damp bark, and the wind no longer cut quite so deep. By then, Willow had been at Elas' place near on 3 months. She worked like she meant to stay, repaired a broken fence post without being asked, cleaned out the henhouse that hadn't seen order in years, and stitched a saddlebag back together with hands that remembered finer things. She never said she was settling in, but her coat found a hook by the door, and her boots left prints alongside his down the same paths every morning. They didn't talk much, still, but the space between their silences had changed. Less guarded now, like a stream that once froze hard now ran beneath the crust, quiet but alive. One evening they sat on the porch while the sun folded itself into the hills, fire-colored and slow. Elas rolled a smoke and offered her one. She didn't take it, just watched the match strike, his face framed in the brief glow. You always lived this quiet? She asked finally. He shrugged, since I learned how. There was a weight to that answer, and she let it hang there, not pressing but marking it. You. Willow leaned back against the porch rail, her fingers curling around a chipped mug of chicory. Quiet found me, after too much noise. He didn't ask for more. She wondered if he guessed. He didn't look at her like a man trying to figure her out. He looked like a man who'd once needed the same thing she did. Peace, maybe, or penance. They didn't touch, not yet, but he stood a little closer now, past her tools with his hand brushing hers just barely. And once, when her mare spooked in a sudden wind and threw her down hard into the dust, he'd reached for her without thinking. His hand on her back, steady and warm, not pulling, just there. That night, she lay awake in the loft and remembered the feel of that hand like a ghost on her spine. Then the letter came. She found it folded beneath a sack of oats in the barn, tucked like someone hadn't meant her to see it right away. Addressed in a hand she didn't recognize. She turned it over twice before breaking the seal. Her fingers trembled, though the day was warm. It was brief, formal, signed by a name she hadn't heard in 2 years but would never forget. A man from her past, not kind, not forgiving, not finished with her. The words bled like poison. He knew where she was. She read it once, then again, her throat locked. Elas found her not long after, standing in the pasture staring hard at the horizon like she meant to ride into it and never stop. He didn't speak at first, just came to her side, looking out over the same stretch of prairie. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer. He didn't repeat himself. Willow held the letter in one hand, then, after a long silence, passed it to him. He read it once, his face unreadable. When he finished, he folded it slow and careful, like he was weighing every word that had ever been written on it. "You need to go?" he asked. Willow swallowed. The wind stirred her hair, lifted the letter from his hands, and carried it into the grass. "I don't know," she whispered. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't offer safety or shelter or vengeance. He just looked at her like she was already home. And for the first time in years, she didn't know which scared her more. The past behind her, or the chance of something real ahead. The next morning, Willow was gone. No note, no explanation, just her saddle missing from the hook and the smell of her horse still fresh in the barn. Elas found the door to the loft ajar and the blanket folded neat, as if she'd never meant to leave a mark at all. He stood there a long time, staring at the quiet space she'd claimed, her absence louder than any goodbye. He'd known it might happen. Some things didn't stay, couldn't, not when the past was still hunting them like blood on snow. But knowing didn't soften the sting. He went back to work the same as always, fixed the trough she'd meant to mend, gathered eggs from the hen that only let Willow near, but the house was different now, quieter somehow, as if the silence had turned inward, thick and watchful. He didn't tell anyone she'd left. Folks in town barely knew she was there to begin with. 2 weeks passed. The night she returned, the rain had just started, a soft, steady fall that darkened the dust and cooled the sweat off the horses. Elas was in the shed sharpening his axe, the whetstone rasping slow across the blade. He didn't hear her ride in, didn't know she was there until the door creaked open and the scent of rain and travel filled the room. She looked thinner, wetter, bone-tired. But her eyes met his like she hadn't been gone a day. He stood, setting the blade aside, and for a long beat neither of them spoke. Then wasn't sure if I'd be welcome. "You're wet," was all he said. She stepped inside. He didn't ask where she'd gone, and she didn't volunteer. Her hands shook as she peeled off her coat. Mud crusted her boots. A bruise bloomed just beneath her collarbone, old and fading but unmistakable. He noticed it, didn't comment. Later, she sat near the fire, cradling a bowl of stew he'd warmed without asking if she was hungry. She didn't eat much, just held the heat between her palms like it meant something. "I thought if I faced him," she said at last, "he'd lose his hold on me." Elas sat in the chair across from her, one leg stretched out, eyes on the flames. "He's gone now?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Far enough, I made sure of it." Elas didn't nod or smile or praise her courage. He only looked at her, really looked, and in his gaze was the steady weight of belief, not in what she'd done, but in who she was. "You came back," he said. She lowered her eyes. "Didn't think I would, thought I was done with staying places." He shifted forward, elbows on his knees. "Sometimes you don't choose a place, it chooses you." They sat in the quiet after that, the fire crackling, the rain ticking gentle on the roof. Her hands steadied. The bruise on her skin didn't vanish, but it no longer seemed the most important mark on her. That night, she didn't return to the loft. She stayed in the house, slept on the old daybed near the hearth while Elas kept watch from the chair beside her, one boot on the floor and the other rested against the wall. He didn't sleep, not really. Just sat there, breathing in the same rhythm she did. When dawn came, he made coffee. She drank it with both hands around the mug, looking out the window toward the pasture, where the grass bent soft in the wind. She didn't say she was staying. But her boots were still by the door. Summer came all at once, like it had been holding its breath and finally let go. The sky stretched wide and bluer than she remembered it could be, the river ran full and fast, and the grass turned the color of fire just before dusk. Willow stayed. Not with fanfare or a promise, but with the quiet conviction of someone who'd made a decision deep in her bones. She still woke before first light, still mended her own clothes, still startled at unexpected sounds. But something inside her had softened, not like weakness, but like soil breaking open for seeds to take root. She planted things. Small things at first. A row of beans near the back porch. 2 lavender bushes beside the shed. When she found an old window frame behind the barn, she scrubbed it clean and hung it inside, where the morning light could pour through the broken panes like water through fingers. Elas noticed. Of course he did, but he didn't speak on it. He only helped her drive the stakes for the tomato vines and sanded the splinters off the window frame before she touched it. They lived like that, side by side, wordless more often than not, but with a growing understanding threaded between them like the wire on the pasture fence. There were still shadows. He had his own. Sometimes he'd stand out by the corral long after the sun went down, staring at nothing in particular, one hand clutched to his shoulder like he was remembering pain that never quite healed. Willow never asked. Some wounds didn't want light. Then one night, thunder rolled in without warning. She was washing dishes at the basin when the first crack split the air, and before she knew it, her hands were shaking, breath short. She dropped the plate she was holding and it shattered on the floor. Elas was there in an instant. He didn't touch her, just crouched down, his voice low. "It's just a storm." She couldn't answer. Her body was already somewhere else, some dark place where shouts came with fists and thunder always meant danger. Elas picked up the shards, careful not to cut himself. Then he straightened, his eyes level with hers. "Come with me." She followed because some part of her trusted him more than the fear. He led her to the barn, the smell of horses and hay grounding her in the present. The wind howled outside, the rain hammering the roof, but in the stall, beside the old piebald mare, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. They sat against the wall, knees barely touching, her fingers white-knuckled on her skirt. "Want to tell me?" he asked. "No." He nodded, let the silence hold. "Then, all right." That was it, no push, no anger, just presence. And after a long while, when her shoulders eased and the storm began to drift east, she said, "When I was a girl, I used to count between the lightning and the thunder, to feel like I had some control." Elas looked at her, but didn't interrupt. "So I'd know how close it was, how much time I had." He picked up a bit of straw and twisted it between his fingers. "Let's count then." And they did. Every time lightning flashed through the cracks in the wall, they counted in slow, even voices until the thunder followed. Willow didn't cry, she hadn't in years, but something unspooled in her, a knot loosening. The next day, the storm gone and the sun new in the sky, she sat on the porch whittling a piece of driftwood into the shape of a bird. Elas brought her coffee, set it beside her, and stood for a minute watching her hands work. "You're good at that," he said. "I used to carve to stay awake." His brow lifted slightly. It was safer not to sleep, back then. He didn't reply, just sat beside her. And the silence between them felt like something sacred. Not empty, but full of all the things they didn't need to say. Autumn came in with gold at its heels. The hills turned the color of rust inside her, the trees shedding their leaves like old stories, and every breath carried the scent of smoke and ripening apples. The nights cooled quick, and the wind found the cracks in the walls, but inside the house it was warm. Willow had taken to leaving the door open when she worked, letting the air in, the sunlight, the sound of Elas' boots on gravel. She didn't flinch anymore when the floor creaked behind her, didn't wake with fists clenched. Sometimes she even hummed under her breath, little tunes with no name. Elas carved a cradle one afternoon. Didn't say why, just brought in the cedar and got to work, smoothing the planks by lamplight while she mended his shirts at the table. She didn't ask, but the rhythm of his work, the care in every curve, said enough. It wasn't about a child. It was about building something meant to last. One morning, while hanging laundry behind the barn, Willow found a sparrow caught in the netting she used to keep the hens from wandering. The bird thrashed, frantic and near broken. She knelt in the dirt, murmuring nonsense, and gently worked its wing free. When it sat trembling in her palm, she felt its heart against her skin, fast and afraid like hers used to be. Then it flew. She stood there for a long time, hand still outstretched, watching it disappear into the wide blue. That evening she sat across from Elas as they ate, her hands curled around a bowl of stew he'd made without salt, just how she liked it. He reached for the pepper, and she reached at the same time, their fingers brushing. They both paused. Something in the quiet changed, sharpened, then softened. "I thought I didn't believe in staying," she said, voice low. He set the tin down, eyes steady on hers. "I thought I didn't believe in letting anyone close," he answered. She nodded once. "Turns out," she said, "I was wrong." They didn't kiss, not yet, but he reached across the table and took her hand. And she let him. Outside, the sky dimmed to indigo, the kind of blue that came just before stars. They walked the fence line together that night. No rush. The wind combed through the dry grass and the moon rose pale over the ridge. When they reached the cottonwood near the edge of the property, she stopped and looked back at the house. "Funny," she said. "What is? How a place can change without changing." He didn't ask what she meant. He just looked at her like he had that first night, like she wasn't something to chase or catch, but something he'd been waiting to find. And Willow, who'd spent so long believing love was a trap or a lie, leaned into the space between them and rested her head against his shoulder. Not as surrender, but as choice. She still carried the past. It would always ride behind her like dust on a trail, but it didn't own her anymore, didn't steer her. She had made it through storms and silence, and nights thick with fear. And here, in this quiet place, with this man who asked for nothing and gave everything. She had come home,